TNMNews.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Denkin, and welcome to a special 420 edition of a TNM News Todd Talk. With me today, I have a special guest who has been around the cannabis space for quite a long time. He is a longtime journalist, a publisher of celebstoner.com, former editor of High Times magazine, former editor-in-chief of Freedom Leaf magazine, co-author of Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life, Reefer Movie Madness, the Ultimate Stoner Film Guide, and guys, he has authored hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles and magazine blogs and everything around. That's where his background is. He's been in the cannabis media space for well over 35 years and also a big part of the cannabis community. And he is also famously known for the guy who discovered 420. So please help me welcome Steve Bloom. Steve, how's it going?
That's great. It's always fun with the name Bloom. You're making me feel a little old, but that's okay. Long time this, long time that.
Right. I'm with you, brother. I'm old too.
Those are my claims to fame in cannabis. So.
Right, exactly. It's funny you have two old guys talking about cannabis. That should be the name of the podcast, right?
We were out there from the start of this all. At least I was.
That's right. No, that's the truth. So we're going to get into how you famously discovered 420. But before we do, I want to talk about the industry overall, your background, and how you got started and all of that stuff. All right. So look, you've been 35 plus years in the cannabis community, right? And what initially drew you to this incredible plant and to really commit your life and your life's work to it?
Well, I was a high school smoker, discovered marijuana in 1970, right after Woodstock, started to go to concerts all the time. Everybody smoked at concerts. And I got into that lifestyle. Daily smoker pretty much all of my life. Post, college, let's say, or maybe into my 20s, just regular smoker. And I'm a music journalist by trade, and I was freelancing and working for different publications in the late 70s and the 80s. And I met a guy named John Holmstrom, who started doing some work for a magazine I was editing called Video Games in 1982. I'd written a book about video games, kind of one of the first ones of that subject. And John was doing cartoon video game reviews at another magazine, Heavy Metal, and I was tipped off to him. And he came over to video games and started doing his stuff for video games, and we became friends. And a few years later, John ended up at High Times. John had a connection to the original founder of High Times, and he started working there in the mid 80s. And as people do in publishing, you kind of follow each other. You follow editors around. An editor goes from here to there. They give you assignments, or vice versa. You do the same for them. And so John got up to High Times, and he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I'm at High Times. Do you want to do a little work for us?" And so he started giving me a couple of freelance assignments in about 1987. He brought me up to the magazine to proofread it one time or a couple of times. So I got a feel of what was going on with the magazine then. To be honest, I wasn't a big reader of High Times. I could only think of maybe buying 2 issues up until that point. I was more into Rolling Stone, The Village Voice, and even New Times was a publication back then. But I wasn't really that familiar with High Times. I kind of missed it in the 70s when it came up.
Right.
And even in the 80s, until the late 80s when I got there. So I really had to learn the subject. I really knew marijuana from being a smoker, but didn't know anything about the politics. Did not know anything about the laws, did not know anything about decriminalization. New York State was decriminalized. I didn't even know that probably, or to whatever degree I wasn't that aware of it. Back then in the 70s, New York decriminalized in 1976. Things were very lenient in New York. It was very hard to get arrested for marijuana. So it really wasn't an issue, I guess, due to decrim. So we had it easy in New York until things changed in the 80s and 90s. But anyway, by like 1988, I was working on another book that was called Watch Out for the Little Guys, a basketball book. And I got a call from John saying, would you be interested in being the news editor of High Times? It's a part-time job. And so let me finish this book. And I took the job, and I started in October 88. My first issue was January 89. My job was to do 8 pages of news. And that was a switch for me because, again, I was like basically a music entertainment journalist.
Right.
And now I had to learn a whole new subject. And what writers do is you learn beats. Like a baseball writer covers the Yankees and maybe goes over to the Mets, or covers baseball and goes over to football.
Right.
So this was a new beat, which I had to learn. And the way I learned was they would drop a box of letters on my desk the first time when I went up there to do my first week. And they said, read this. And it was a box full of handwritten letters. And I'd say 90% of the letters were bust stories, people who got arrested for marijuana all over the country. I
Right.
had no idea it was that bad. I mean, hundreds of letters from people telling us their bust stories. And it was usually in clips from the newspaper, a handwritten thing. And not that I use those articles for stories, but it just tipped me off to what was really going on out there.
Right.
And then, of
Right.
course, I dove in. I started to go to the normal conferences. I started to go to the rallies. I went to Hash Bash. High Times was very involved with all the events to help promote the events. And I started covering all that as a news editor. So I kind of started to meet everybody in the community, all the normal people, Jack Herrer, Dennis Perone, all the heavy players, and I got to know all of
Yeah.
them. A lot of them are gone now. So I was lucky to
Sure.
have met them back then and, learn
Sure.
from them.
Sure.
And then, a couple of years in, I was now getting more and more entrenched at High Times. So it was no longer really a part-time job. I was going to meetings. I was there more than I was, being paid for. And they offered me a full-time job. Somebody left and they had an opening. They offered me a full-time job about 1991. And the editor there switched me over to more of an entertainment coverage because he knew
Mm.
my background. Then he hired another
Right.
news editor and he said, you gave me a section of which I named Buzz in the back, which was like music, movies, arts, culture, whatever,
Mm.
reviews. And I started doing that. And by 92, things all broke out majorly when we put Cypress Hill on the cover and Black Crowes on the cover. And we really dove into the music coverage. And it
Right.
was kind of a surprise to me, but the bands were really into High Times. And
Yeah.
we started to get calls from publicists. Once we put Cypress and Black Crowes, we started to get calls. Hey, how about covering my band? My band likes High Times, so on and so forth. And it just became a great, role for us to be on and me to be on there in the 90s, being like the music editor of High Times. What a great period. So
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
different
For
styles
sure.
of music. I mean, and a lot of
Yeah.
things I wasn't into, like say metal. All these metal bands are into High Times. Well, if you're into High Times, we're going to cover you, and I'm going to go to your show and check you out. Like a band like Pantera, which I probably would have never got to see,
Right.
But I got into them too. My music taste expanded. Got into reggae more. I knew reggae, but I didn't know reggae that well. And then I became the liaison to the Marley family. I
Oh,
became the
nice.
liaison to Willie Nelson. I became the liaison to Snoop Dogg. What a blast. So it was really good,
Sure.
good
Sure.
period and good time for me. And things changed as time went on at High Times. And I left High Times in 2007, but it was a really great run of 20 years.
What do you think was the most pivotal moment or shift that happened during that time before you left?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of shifts, but up until I left, I mean, legalization had not happened. So I can't say, we're still working on that.
Sure.
So we were still kind of behind, in trying to make that happen. I will say, I do think that one big change we made at High Times, and it started with the Cypress Hill cover story, was outreach to hip hop and reaching out to the Black audience that really wasn't tied into the community yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly a white scene. Most of the people at the normal conferences were white, and so I think that was a big change because now we, High Times, had kind of created a bridge, and the bridge worked. And we also, because of the success of the Cypress Hill article, we would come back every year with a hip hop issue and cover hip hop in general in the magazine. I think High Times kind of became cool to the hip hop community, and that outreach I think was significant. I like to take some credit for that.
Oh yeah, I'm big credit for that for sure. How do you think that the public's perception of cannabis, and those who use cannabis, right, has changed from that time in the 80s and 90s, compared to like mainstream acceptance today?
Yeah, massive change. I mean, we were the people who always have to walk out the back door to smoke and come back in. Everybody
Right.
look at our eyes, and then
Right.
giggle a little bit. Hey, they're the stoners. Now everybody's the stoners. you know, we're
That's
just
right.
not.
That's right.
There's a way more. I mean, Sanjay Gupta's latest weed program on CNN number 8 is coming on Sunday, and that's women in weed. And the whole thing is about how there's more use from women. Women are outpacing men in use of cannabis now. That's a huge change. I mean, women were always out there doing it, but it was always perceived as the dudes, sitting, doing Harold and Kumar sitting in their basement and lighting up,
Right.
the dudes.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
changed dramatically. It's women have, and also seniors, of course, and I am, but I'm not typical of the seniors because I've been smoking all my life, but a lot of seniors,
Same. Yeah.
baby boomers took a break while they're raising their kids or this or that, and they get back to it now when they're a little achy and they need a gummy to go to sleep, or they got an ache in the neck or something that they think will help with CBD. And so it's become much more common. CBD kind of opened some doors too to people
Yeah.
who might not have wanted to use any kind of cannabis product, but they think, well, you're not smoking, you're not getting high, but it's helping my whatever muscle that's bothering me or something. So you find another use for it that it's not just smoking. So I think that's
Yeah.
expanded as well. And now it's almost so expanded it's too complicated for people to understand. There's so many cannabinoids out there. You don't even
That's
know
right.
what's what unless you're really a student of it. And even someone like me who knows a lot, sometimes can even get confused.
Yeah. 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 The seniors are the fastest growing segment of cannabis users right now. And like you said, in the 60s, because everybody back in the 60s and 70s, they're now senior citizens now, right? And they used to smoke pot. They stopped for a while, and now they're back. And it's really creating a whole new, market for the industry. What do you think that the most common misconceptions about the cannabis industry or the cannabis community that still exists today?
Oh, no, I know it's a misconception, but it's kind of been overrun by kind of corporations and stuff, which is to be expected in this country. This is how this country operates.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a misconception, but um, the whole movement of legalization has been like up and down, kind of rocky. Every state's got different laws. You could cross over to Massachusetts and New York, and from New York and get $100 ounces. In New York, it's still 300-400.
Right.
So misconceptions are, it's not really misconceptions, it's just that things are very different from state to state. Misconceptions, of course, the medical use, the CHS type of stuff about scromining, which has become a big media story. That's kind of misconceptions. I mean, it's very limited, but yet the media builds it up into, it being kind of a real major problem. So there's constantly, baiting the cannabis community with negative research, bad for you stuff. When are they going to stop with the bad for you?
Right. Right.
And they don't have
Got to
to
save the
praise it. They
kids.
don't have to
Right.
praise it and say it's great for you, but they talk about this scromining stuff and people occasionally throwing up from marijuana. How often do you throw up from being drunk? Is that a big issue? I mean,
Right.
it's just understood that that could happen. Now, with weed,
Right.
it probably shouldn't, but if it does, okay, so what? But don't make such a big deal out of it.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
we're in the middle of this, pushback from the right who doesn't like the marijuana being legalized. So they're pushing back with negative stories as best as they can. And it creates kind of reefer madness, two, three, whatever you want to call it. But
Right.
I think most of us know, and the average person, I think, is learning on their own. It's not so bad for you.
Yeah, there's tons of education out there nowadays that didn't really exist, back in the 80s and 90s, also. And I believe that helps. I always say that good education creates good legislation, right? So it is important that people do get educated about what's going on. What do you think that the key policy battles are that still need to be won to normalize cannabis in the United States?
Well, it's federal for the most part because most of the states that have been able to pass some form of legalization, it's done already. And other states, the states like Texas and Alabama, are kind of going around the corners making it happen, even though they never voted for it with hemp products or whatever. So, the states that don't have legalization in any form, they're the states that have dove into the hemp products because they don't have access to anything else legally. And there's a gray area around hemp. That's a big issue. It's a huge issue in cannabis right now. with the deadline coming in November to ban all of the hemp-derived products and keep a very low THC level, for anything hemp related. And the industry is fighting back on this. They're trying to stop the ban. I'm not a big fan of the hemp products, and I don't really care about the ban too much, but a lot of people in the industry do because there's jobs at stake.
Right.
I don't live in a state where we have that problem. In New York, we have legalization, so we don't need all those hemp products to fill the gap where it's not legal. And that, of course, is the problem across the country. State by state, laws are different. Some states have no laws protecting cannabis users, and obviously other states have some laws. Some states are medical, some states are both, some states, are hemp only, some states are CBD only, that kind of stuff. So it's really a patchwork, and kind of confusing. You could drive across the country in every state. You have to like throw it away, pick it up, hide it. You don't have to, whatever. Some places you can actually smoke in public, some you can't, like New York. So it varies greatly. And on the other side, of course, is the rescheduling debate, which Trump dove into and decided that he supported rescheduling to Schedule 3 with the executive order a few months ago, and everybody's waiting for that to happen. A lot of people in cannabis don't like that because they think it's not a big enough change. And I agree with that. And descheduling is really the hope. But with this type of government we have now, even with Biden, who really wasn't into that, he was into rescheduling, not descheduling. So it's like with the governments we've had, you got to take what you can get. And I will take Schedule 3 because the thing about Schedule 3 is that even though it doesn't change things that dramatically, it does change the public perception by saying that cannabis is not a drug of abuse and it has
Right.
medical use. And in Schedule 1, it says the opposite: bad for you, don't use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not where things are at these days. So I think that issue, those are the two main issues right now on the federal level. And statewise, it's like whatever the states can do. The states that don't have legalization, good luck if they can pass stuff. But in the last few
Yeah.
years, states like Oklahoma and South Dakota and places like that who passed it, things either failed or they pulled it back after it passed. So it's kind of hard in the red states to get anything done at this point.
Yeah, that's for sure. With anything, not just cannabis, but just to get
Exactly.
anything done.
Exactly.
Right. Um, Let me ask you, a lot of new people who are unfamiliar with cannabis are going to be watching this particular broadcast. And so for consumers who have been really either in a nice shirt, who have either been buying weed in the black market or have not bought weed at all because they were afraid to buy weed in the black market, um, what kind of advice can you offer to help these new folks navigate the regulated commercialized market?
Well, we've gone from, dealers, house dealers, people who go door to door, make their deliveries or delivery services, like in a place like New York, to smoke shops, before the legal stores came in. And there was that big wave of smoke shops that opened in New York and created problems for the legal industry once the legal industry kicked off because they were getting a lot of competition from stores down the block. They were selling for half the price and no taxes and things like that. And, the whole thing about, we grew up smoking weed that came from sources we didn't know where it came from. And your friendly dealer would make it available. And I don't know people who got sick from that weed, generally speaking. That system kind of worked. The only thing that didn't work was getting arrested for it.
Right.
But otherwise, it kind of
Right.
worked in its own way. It worked. The weed got sent from some place to some other place, or got grown here and then it was sold there or whatever. They moved around the country, illegally. And those of us who are smokers or users, we would find it. You find
Yeah.
it from some guy in the street or some dealer friend of yours that you knew, and they became your regular person, who you may be your regular person for the next 15 years,
That's right. That's right.
because you like to go to the same person and you feel safe with them and they have good supply and whatever.
Yeah.
But then came these illegal stores and with, many more options, cheaper prices, non-tested, but everything up until then wasn't tested, except for maybe some medical weed. So again, it wasn't an issue to the average person out there. They don't care about it being tested because it was okay before, so why shouldn't it be okay now? But now, of course, with legal marijuana, it is tested and it is cleaner. You do know if there's anything wrong with it and it will be sent back. Okay, that's good. Not that we absolutely totally need that because we did it without it for so long, but I understand why we need it in a legal market. So I mean, that's how things have sort of changed. And of course, pricings. Again, we live in New York, where New York is a couple years behind Massachusetts in terms of their rollout of legalization. Massachusetts prices have really gone down, way down. I mean, $5 a gram, $100 an ounce or less for
Yeah,
good
that's cheap.
quality.
Yeah.
Whereas in New York, we're still at like 15 a gram or 12 a gram, 58s, you can get a $200 bag, of smalls or something. But, it still is not, you kind of would want to go across to Massachusetts and get the cheaper product that might be just as good. So,
Right.
my two things about cannabis in terms of legalization is like there are two things that need to be done with legalization. Stop arresting people, getting people out of jails. That's one and two. Our third thing is lower the prices. We've been
Yeah.
paying way too much for cannabis for way too long, and it's eaten up a lot of our budgets.
Yeah,
So
that's for
bring
sure.
down the prices like it has happened in Colorado, Oregon, California, wherever,
California.
waiting
Yeah.
for, they call it price compression, waiting for that to happen here in New York. It's happening slowly, but I think the retailers don't want it to happen because they want to make more money and they feel
That's
they're
right.
squeezed now already by regulations and too many stores all around them and all kinds of issues where it makes it hard to make a living. And
Yeah.
so they want to keep the prices high. And I think New York is probably going to manipulate it as much as they can to keep the prices high. But I can't wait till they keep dropping. And then we could try more things. Then I can go into the
Yeah.
store and buy 5/8 instead of
Right.
like, whatever, for a hundred
Right.
bucks.
Right.
That's
Right.
what I want. So it hasn't happened yet here. But it's just, it's a slow rollout, and also legalization has lots of rules, lots of very strict what you can and can't do. I mean, the stores in New York look like you don't even want to walk into a lot of black windows. You can't see inside. It's terrible, honestly. Some of these places, the rules
Yeah.
that they put on the stores where you can't advertise, can't put a pot leaf outside,
I
you
know
can't
it's silly.
advertise in magazines. It's ridiculous.
It is.
Billboards, all kinds of
It's
silly
just
rules
silly.
that prevent,
Yeah.
cannabis
Yeah.
companies from making money. So, I mean, all that stuff will change gradually as the governments realize it's not such a problem and it's not all about the kids and protecting the kids. They always want to protect the kids. They don't want the kids smoking and stuff.
Yeah.
But bit by bit, I think we're in the middle of this. We see from the beginning, 2014, when the first rollout in Colorado. So
Hmm.
it's all fairly new still. It's 12 years in. So it's going to take some more time to normalize legalization.
Yeah, that's for sure. The good news is that it does get good press also, not just bad press. And it is becoming more and more accepted, more and more mainstream. And, the average soccer mom now isn't ostracized,
Right.
right, for
Well,
smoking a joint instead of drinking a glass of wine, which is just perfectly fine,
Well,
right?
also the beauty in New York is that New York is the equity state when it comes to cannabis. No other
Yeah.
state has figured out how to do it like New York. And
Yeah.
so people who were most harmed by the drug war were the first online to get licenses. And those are mostly black people, women, uh, soldiers, whatever, just people who, needed a break to get in the
Yeah.
door first and tried to prevent the bigger companies from taking over the market immediately. Now, those bigger companies didn't like it. They sued, but they were
Yeah.
forced to pay like $20 million to jump in early, and
Yeah.
they're willing. Most of them did it. Curaleaf, companies like that, okay, because we know there's a lot of money in this market, and we'll pay this big price
Right.
to get in the
Right.
door. So New
Right.
York really tried very hard to prevent the corporate takeover from the beginning. And I mean, the bigger companies are in New York, but at least the opportunity for the smaller companies came first.
Yeah, I think the average smoker, the average stoner is doesn't really want corporate weed, right? They want, weed that's grown by a guy who gives a shit, right? And not someone treating it like, industrial agriculture, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I think we're gonna have both. This is the way of America. Look at, say, beer, companies, craft beers. This is craft cannabis. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. You'll have the
Yeah.
Budweiser and you'll have the higher end, craft products that are grown in smaller batches. You'll pay more for,
Yeah.
and it needs to be distinguished. Like right now in stores, you don't really know the difference. You kind of maybe guess by price, but you don't know what's craft and what's not. I
Yeah.
mean, if you know the names, okay, this is a bigger company, it's a smaller company, but you really have to study and you really have to know what's
Yeah.
what. You have to try
Yeah.
everything, and it costs
Yeah.
a lot to do that.
That's
And
for sure.
you can't even see it before you buy it because it's in enclosed bags. You
That's
don't even
right.
know. You can't smell test. You can't even have a visual test. You're guessing.
Yeah,
I
those are
mean,
the old days of California.
I liked it in California when they had the jars and they had the
Yeah.
chopsticks. You go in there and
Yeah.
take it out, and you can look and smell. This is pre-COVID, before you put your nose
Yeah.
in a
That's
jar,
right.
you
That's
know.
right.
But
Yeah.
still, I like that, and that was during the gray area of medical and adult use in California before it passed legally, and that
Right.
seemed to work great. But that's not what they do now. Everything is sealed. Everything
Everything
is
is sealed.
close it up, and you can't see it, and you don't know what this batch looks like compared to the last batch.
That's right.
It's not like going and
That's right.
buying. I buy a bottle of $12 wine, once a week at my local wine shop, and I get the same one every time because it's going to taste the same.
Yeah. Exactly right.
In cannabis, you don't know that.
That's true.
You just don't
That
know.
is
If you like
very true.
something, the last thing you got, oh, that was a great strawberry gelato. I want that again. You may not find it.
You may not
And if
find
you
it, or
do,
it
and
may
if you
be
do, and
called something
it
else.
doesn't look or
That's
taste
right.
the same.
That's right.
So standardization would be good, but I don't really begrudge the big companies as long as there's room for the small ones. Let the big
Yeah.
companies do their industrial stuff and keep the price cheap for those who don't really care about super quality. And for
Right.
those who are the
Right.
connoisseurs, make that
Yeah.
available for the connoisseurs and let them pay a little bit more for higher end weed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Now, looking to the future, what do you think? What kind of cannabis consumption trends or cultivation or research do you find most exciting or most concerning?
Well, pre rolls. I mean, pre rolls, I'd rather taking over. I just
Yeah.
interviewed Josh Kesselman, who runs Raw, and
Hmm.
he was, I talked to him a lot about that. What are you doing with, how are you have a rolling paper company? Younger people are not rolling. They may not even know how to roll. Well,
Right.
obviously, he's making a lot of money on cones. They are pre-made and can be used in multiple other ways for pre-rolls. I'm sure makes a lot of
Sure.
money in that. But he basically said we want to teach Gen X to roll. That's why he does all those instructional videos and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously people's tastes have changed. Flower is still popular, but it's maybe more for the legacy people like us who just are the rollers, and we're the flower people, and people coming in are just using gummies. They don't even use flour. And by the way, in New York stores, I don't really buy a lot of flour because, again, like I said, sort of you can't trust, you don't know the quality. But the gummies are pretty regulated. You just know they're decent.
Yeah.
And I'll buy gummies in New York. And I have, like, say, I like Camino, whatever, so I'll buy, I'll go regularly there and I'll buy that because I know that's standardized. It always is the same. You know what you're getting. So the different things that people can do, to consume. So I think, edibles via gummies seems to be the number one thing, less say cookies, brownies, and butters and
Yeah.
stuff. We have
Yeah.
to know a little bit more about the dosages. And pre-rolls are huge because they're so convenient. The problem with pre-rolls is, anybody could figure that they could put anything in it and you won't know, so mostly, figure it's mostly low end, you know, ground up, mid weed, but they fill it with other things, so they infuse it, make it a little stronger. So I mean, that's big, that's really huge.
Yeah.
So that's a big shift in the way people consume, gummies, pre-rolls versus rolling your own or
Yeah.
lighting up a bong. So that's for really particular people. I'm a bong guy. I love bongs. That's my preferred way to smoke. When I'm out
Mhm.
joints, because you're out among people
Yeah.
socializing, carry a joint with you in a little tube. That's the easy way to go. Not even a pipe where it's messy. Just tube, just joints when I'm out, and bongs when I'm home. I barely smoke a
Nice.
joint at home. It's more for passing around with people. Now we're back to passing again post COVID.
Right.
But bongs is my way to go.
Yeah.
My favorite intake method of flower. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I'm sure there'll be different methodologies that come down the road. I'm not sure I have any predictions for what the methodologies would be, but things will be more digital. As far as growing, obviously, I'm not a grower, but I know there's all kinds of grow techniques that are changing dramatically, all
Mhm.
kinds of high-tech methodologies. So that's going to continue to happen in the grow world, which is very
Yeah.
techy at this point. You
Yeah.
got to be into tech to really grow indoors. Outdoors,
For sure.
not no, but indoors, yes. So good to learn and maybe take a class and study people like Danny Danko and Kyle Cushman and Ed
Yeah.
Rosenthal and all the great information they provide.
Yeah.
That's not so easy. The whole idea of home grow, nice concept and a good fight to get home grow in states where it's not allowed, say New Jersey or Washington State, where it's legal otherwise. But I'm not so sure how many people are really going to take advantage and actually succeed with
Right.
it. So,
Right.
I'm not sure the homegrown mantra really is that important because I don't think that many people are going to take advantage. And by the way, I've done some home growing of cannabis, and it's not like growing tomatoes.
No, it's not.
It's hard to fuck up a tomato, but boy, you could fuck up cannabis real easy.
You definitely can.
You know,
Yeah, I
and
think that's why most people don't do it at home because it is
you
difficult.
just can't
And
grow to the quality that you get in the store. Whereas a
that's right.
tomato, you can get a great, beautiful red, cut up a tomato, red tomato you'll never see in a store. Store is pink,
That's right.
But your cannabis you're gonna grow most likely, unless you know what you're doing,
That's right.
is going to be inferior to anything you're going to be able to buy in a store,
Right.
and you're going to kind of waste your time. And that's what I feel I've done. But maybe I have to learn some things too. And I just read an article an article in High Times about growing, and the guy said, "Listen, you're not a grower until you make mistakes and you lose a
Oh
crop."
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for
last
sure.
year I was growing with a friend and we overwatered a couple of plants, and I thought I could save those plants. They were unsavable. I was clipping off yellow leaves to the very end. That
Right.
plant
Right.
was
That's not good.
unsavable. I had to learn the hard way. Probably should have gutted it from the beginning when it started heavily. Whatever reason we overwatered and it got super super waterlogged to the point where it yellowed. It turned like within a week. It turned, and I thought
Right.
we could save
Right.
it. So you learn the hard way. But so I just think it's for really particularly good growers who really have a patience to grow cannabis. And if you want to do the indoor, then you really have to study it a lot more than just outdoor. Outdoor, just put it in a pot like tomato and
Right.
give it some good fertilizer, that kind of stuff. But
Right.
indoor, you really have to study.
Yeah, that's for sure. That is for sure. What do you think the biggest story in cannabis is right now that isn't receiving enough attention?
Well, I mean, the biggest stories that are getting the attention I sort of mentioned.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, just the general success of the industry by and large. In a hamstrung kind of way to roll out a new industry, with all kinds of regulations that make it very hard. By hook or by crook, this industry is building roots in the U.S. And getting it done, despite how hard it is. Despite all the regulations, despite all the things that have been obstacles that have put in people's way, licensing, that takes forever. New York still has people, from 2 years ago waiting for licenses, things like that. But at the same time, New York has 600 dispensaries now, and
Right.
3 years ago there were none. So I mean, so maybe the idea of like putting it down or it's not working or it's unsuccessful, I think that's wrong. I mean, it is successful. I mean, it's been rocky, but it's new and it's exciting to kind of watch a new industry roll out. When do you even get a chance to do that?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. I don't know about misconceptions constantly around medical use, constantly around health related questions around cannabis,
Right.
the CHS stuff that I've talked about. I think that's kind of a misconception, that so much media effort is placed on that particular condition that's very, very rare.
Right.
I mean, most cannabis users don't know anybody who's thrown up ever on cannabis, yet there
Yeah.
are people who have apparently. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, we wonder why has it become such a big deal when none of us know anybody who's sick.
That's right.
And maybe the newer people are getting sick because they're not used to it or something. Maybe they're taking high strength stuff that's kind of messing with them.
Yeah.
So I
Very
mean,
possible.
so
Yeah.
people have to really be careful. All these 100 milligram gummies and stuff like that, it's silly. So don't overdo it. That's for sure.
Yeah. 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 That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, you have a storied background, and one thing you are especially famous for is the fact that you discovered 420, right? So on this 420, please tell us the story of how that all happened.
One of my favorite stories to tell. So in 1990, I was in my early stages of being editor at High Times, and another thing that I decided to do while I was there to be the Grateful Dead reporter. So nobody was covering the Dead up at High Times when I got there, and so there was a lot of happening in the Dead community. The Dead scene was traveling around quite a bit. It was really big, and it was being harassed by the police. And there were a lot of people getting arrested at shows, undercovers, narcs were all over the place. A couple of kids died, a couple of deadheads died in the parking lot. So I was kind of covering all of that, kind of a parking lot editor, so to speak, for the Dead, and going to the shows too, but almost like hanging in the parking lot and really getting into the scene. And I went to Oakland for their New Year's run of shows, which the Dead would Jews say 4 shows up into New Year's Eve. And I went out there for at least one show. I had tickets for one show, and maybe with the idea I could score something for New Year's Eve. And that first day, I think it was like December 27th, 1990, me and friends were walking around the parking lot, and we came to a guy who was handing out flyers that were green and like a half page, like cut in half, so like a full page. And it told the story of 420, which is something I and my friends had never heard of. And we looked at it and like read it. It was like, I mean, I don't have it in front of me right now to read it to you, but I'll just basically, summarize what it said, which was that it said that marijuana, 420 was the code for a marijuana arrest in progress in California or in San Francisco. And so let's smoke at 420 was kind of the peculiar logic of this flyer, that we sort of should flip the script and smoke at 420 because they're arresting us using a code that says 420. And that was the beginning of the missive. And then the rest of it was focused on everybody getting together on 420, April 20th, at 420 for a massive global smokeout. That we need to join together as a community worldwide and smoke all at once together at 420. And they said some other things on it like support NORML, a few other kind of statements, had some funny things like they wanted everybody to meet in Mount Tamalpais, which is north of San Francisco Park. And that was a good place. The stoners love to hang out there and to meet at the Bolinas Ridge on Mount Tamalpais, and we'll have a big smoke out there. And then they had funny lines, you got to do it on time. No fucked up lighters was one of the things they said. Don't miss that moment.
Right.
So they really, really it really piqued my interest. Like, what is this? Wow. I mean, High Times is all about cannabis culture. And here was something we did not know anything about. Mm-hmm. And so, I just tucked it in my pocket and came back to High Times and showed it around. And nobody had ever heard of 420 at High Times either. And then we started to adopt some 420 principles, like smoking at 420 in the office. I mean, people would smoke at different hours at High Times, but we also were in office buildings and had to kind of be careful with our neighbors in the building and stuff.
Sure.
So we often would leave the building or go up on the roof, or we had a porch in another one of the offices. So it wasn't so easy always to smoke at 420 in the office. We'd step outside at 420. And even for the 420 on April 20th, before there were any events, this is, remember the early 90s, just 20 of us from the office would walk out to the local park, Union Square Park, and sit at a picnic bench and pass joints underneath the table. And that was our 420 celebration on 420, because you have to be careful. People were getting arrested like crazy in New York around that time for smoking in public. But we did it, just to kind of celebrate it. And then events started to spring up in California, 420 events that were run by the Cannabis Action Network in the mid to late 90s. So what changed was that in about 1995, 1996, some guys from California reached out to High Times and says, hey, wait a second, there's no such code. And we were the ones that created it. And so they spun a story that they were students who went to San Rafael High School, and they decided after school to get together at 420 to smoke out. And they contacted High Times with that idea, and also they reached out to somebody at High Times who had a company called 420 Tours and were running tours to Amsterdam for High Times events. And so they were saying, well, that's not true. So one of the editors of High Times went out there to do an interview with them, and he heard their whole story and concluded that it was accurate, and just concluded that they were the founders of 420.
They're the Waldos, right?
The Waldos, right? Yep. The famous Waldos. And I met the Waldos at one of those events in California, and they showed me some of their evidence, which was like salutations on a letter, 420 this or 420 that. They didn't have that much real evidence, but they had enough to sort of justify their claim. The thing is that, around that time when High Times credited the Waldos with 420, I started to get some responses out in California saying that's not true, that there are other people that preceded the Waldos, and the Waldos kind of stole it. So, and there is an article that debunks the Waldos at 420 magazine. a few years ago. I'm not into debunking the Waldos. I'm just kind of saying that it may not have quite happened that way. That it was more kind of a game of telephone that went around the Bay Area within the Deadhead community, and it was more a collective, thing. It was not one person or group of people that came up with it. And if it was, it may or may not have been the Waldos.
Right.
But I don't want to take anything away from them per se. They are credited and they've received the credit, and this is the way people perceive it. And that's okay. What I like to say is that they may or may not have been the first, but they definitely did not invent the holiday. And that flyer clearly invented the holiday. It said clearly to get together on April 20th, 420, at 420 for mass 420ing around the world. That was their idea. And really what 420 is now, is a celebration of the day, a national stoner holiday where people go to events, concerts, parks, and are in a community where everybody's doing the same thing on the same day, which is what we do normally anyway, but it's all peaked to one day. So I credit whoever wrote that flyer, and we've never found out, with creating the 420 holiday.
And it is quite fascinating that all of this has happened, and then what 420 has turned into, right, over the years, because you've seen it grow from absolutely zero, right, to now, like you said, major festivals, concerts, and get-togethers all over the world. Quite honestly, what are your plans for 420?
Well, 420 this year is on a Monday, so that's not really a great 420 day. We just had a weekend. We had Easter last year, 420, which was wild,
Yeah.
420 this year is really this weekend, coming 18th and 19th, with some things happening on the 20th. I put together the 420 calendar, which I have to say is the best 420 list of events anywhere on the web. And I take
Nice. Where
pride
do we
in that.
find it? Where do we find that?
It's my website, Slebstoner.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, it's on my slebstoner.com. It's Slebstoner's 420 guide of events. And this is kind of mostly for events in what I call the 420 cycle, which is say 417 to 420, and then pre 420, and then post 420, whatever. But there's a big chunk of about 60 events during the 420 cycle from the 17th to the 20th. In New York, we have a big event in Washington Square Park that started about 5 years ago once legalization kicked in. And it's like an event that's loosely organized that people just know to go to Washington Square Park, which is kind of known in New York as the home for cannabis in parks. Used to be the home for the cannabis parade events, which got moved to Union Square. But that's sort of the village, the Greenwich Village kind of place to hang for weed. It's where people used to go when they were younger to buy loose joints, that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's where David Lee Ross was busted for buying a $5 joint when he was younger. So it's like that's kind of one of the homes for cannabis in New York. And so people just congregate there, and it gets bigger and bigger. I mean, basically people set up their own tables and sell stuff. There's a lot of smoking. There's some music. It's not an organized event with a big stage and that kind of stuff. It's just kind of scattered around the park. There's a fountain in the middle of the park and a big arc, like an Arc de Triomphe, and people kind of all in that area. So it's kind of a fun scene as it builds to 420. So I'll go there. I go there every year. And as far as the nighttime events, there are a few things here and there around town I'll go to. There's no major event like music. The big music events are usually in Red Rocks out in Colorado. Snoop
Yep.
Dogg and Wiz Khalifa, they all have shows. Ice Cube, a lot of hip hop. Cypress Hill always does something on 420. Bruce Springsteen has a 420 show this year, but he's not known as a stoner, but he's
Right.
performing on 420.
Nice.
So I look at also who the major performers are who are actually doing shows on 420 or the weekend of. You look at Fish. Fish is doing Sphere for 420. So that type of fun stuff. There's a 420 Sweetwater 420 Festival in Atlanta. That's always a good event. So, stuff all over the country, but it's just, hit and miss depending on where you live. But I'll do that. I'll go to a couple of 420 events around New York, but it's not as big as it was last year. And what I like to say also is historically, my favorite 420 events were at the University of Colorado Boulder. About 2008, 2009, pre-legalization there, the students decided they were going to have 420 rally. And they also did this in Santa Cruz, University of California. It was really just student-run event. just kind of flash mob. And I went there for it twice, and they were really the best 420 events I ever went to, where the students just all showed up in mass from say quarter to 4 to 420 on the diag, or it was like the as fed up as a diag there. It's a and the kids just show up gradually, bit by bit, showing up. No stage, no announcements. Some people selling things in the crowd, and all of a sudden, more and more lighting up until 420 comes. A huge cloud of smoke. Everybody applauses and cheers, and then you see a cloud of smoke over in front of the mountains. A beautiful scene and a beautiful setting. And unfortunately, with legalization, the university never liked it, and they canceled it once legalization happened. It was kind of ironic. Now it's legal, you can't have the event anymore. When it's illegal, right, we let you get away with it. Those are my really most fun. That was pre-legalization, when you really were putting yourself out there on the line, doing stuff that you could get, suspended by the school. I always thought it was kind of funny. I mean, some of these kids would just go into town and just party the rest of the day or the night, and a lot of kids maybe had to go back to class stoned.
Right. That's so funny. Yeah, I went to University of Florida, and literally everybody's apartment or dorm I was ever in, there was always a bong on the table,
Right.
every single time, without fail. Well, Steve, this has been real fascinating, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your incredible stories, especially your 420 story. Where do folks see you? Besides celebstoner.com,
Well,
how do we follow you?
Celebstoner is a good place to start. That's my website. I've had that ever since I left High Times. That site is older than most cannabis websites now. Pretty much, yeah. I don't even know what's older than that, other than maybe High Times and Normal. So that's a good place to start. I've shifted a lot of my content over to Patreon, where I post the Celebstoner newsletter every week. And so I'm kind of proud of that newsletter. People seem to like that. Need to join, my group there as a paid or a free member to access the newsletter and some of the other stories I put out there for free. But so Patreon, Celeb Stoner, really good place to find me. And Celeb Stoner at all. That's kind of where I post most of my content. And lately, I'm also doing some writing. My 420 article that I sent you today in the other, called 420 101, is posted at the other magazine that's currently out now. And I have an article that I'm written about Josh Kesselman, the new owner of High Times and the founder of Raw, that will be posted at rollingstone.com on Monday. So look forward to all that good stuff. And happy
That's awesome. Yes, and a happy 420 to you, sir. I know we met several years ago, about 10 years ago, so it's great to reconnect. It was, again, just fascinating hearing all of your stories. I'd love to hear more. So let's hook up in a few months and see what's going on.
Yeah, part two.
And we'll catch up then. So Steve Bloom, thanks a lot for joining us. Make sure you check out celebstoner.com, and make sure you check out Patreon, celebstoner.com, and look for Steve Bloom. He's a pioneer. Thanks for all of your work in the industry. Thanks for doing the groundwork, and thanks for really exposing cannabis and really sharing it with the rest of the world. You're truly a pioneer in the industry, and it's really been a pleasure chatting with you today. Yes, happy 420, and we'll see you soon. All right.
We are TNM News.